oncoming pandemic, COVID pandemic at the time, and the growth has remained robust. And there has been a year-on-year increase of over 40% increase in the sales of electric vehicles. We have an issue in that most major manufacturers have announced that they will be gradually moving away from the manufacturing of electric vehicles, of ICE vehicles to electric vehicles. And in fact, the UK has indicated that by 2030, they will not have, or they will prohibit the sales of vans, cars powered by gasoline and diesel engine. So the implication of this is tremendous to the Jamaican society. Looking at the local status and the regional status, we find that Jamaica is behind in terms of the uptake of electric vehicle compared to our regional partners. For instance, Barbados, they are a first mover in respect to the region, and they have on record registered over 400 EVs, and they are one of the largest world users of EV on a per capita basis. When you travel along, move over to the Cayman Island, they, in 2019, have licensed over 160 EVs to operate. But where we in Jamaica, based on the data we have received from the tax TAJ, only in 2018, only 10 EVs have been registered. And so it is safe to say that we are lagging behind our regional partners. But the situation is not lost, as Jamaica is one of the Caribbean leaders in renewable energy deployment. So we intend to take up that lead position in terms of electric vehicle adoption. A number of initiatives have started and are continuing. The Inter-American Development Bank, partnering with the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, have studied electromobility and have developed a strategic framework to assist the government to seamlessly introduce electric vehicles into the transport mix. The Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology has also set a goal of 10% of transportation to be provided by electric vehicles by 2030. JPS, for its part, has commenced the installation of 10 public EV charging stations at locations island-wide, and they are expected to complete this rollout during 2021. There's also private sector involvement in that there are private sector chargers now being contemplated and deployed for EVs and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. The OUR, for its part, as the regulator, we have introduced EV charging rate in the tariff, the recent published tariff determination. We have also approved a capital costs in that said determination for 10 charging stations island-wide. We have also published determined rates for public chargers of 5% above the normal rate. Now, let us look at some of the benefits to be derived from large-scale EV adoption in Jamaica. EV, as is known, based on the research and the experience worldwide, EV have lower maintenance costs due to the fewer components, energy efficiency, and EV is about 3 to 5 times more efficient compared to conventional vehicles. And most importantly, it provides a sense or an improvement in the energy security of the country, because we would have reduced our dependence on oil imports to fuel the conventional vehicles. Most importantly, environmental impact mitigation. We have this as a potential to reduce pollution, because recall, ICE gasoline vehicles are really mobile pollutants. So wherever they go, they create a sense of pollution. We look at in a little more detail, the avoided emission cost. Fuel reduction, and we have estimated in our research, the working group, a reduction of over 280,000 tons of carbon emission per annum, assuming that we have a take-up rate of 30% of EVs in the transportation mix, and thus a consummate reduction in the barrel of oils imported into the country to the extent of 20 million barrels of oil equivalents. While those benefits are very significant, it is definitely not smooth sailing. There are clear barriers. The working group research has indicated that common to almost every country that have adopted EVs, the barriers include the upfront cost of purchasing an EV. Our analysis has indicated that the price of an EV in Jamaica is about 30% more than a similar ICE vehicle. The question of public charging station, this is manifested in terms of range concern, the concern that you will run out of gas, of charge before you reach your destination. So there are concerns about getting available energy charging facilities. Very importantly, given the finite lifetime of batteries, the issue of the environmental impact of end-of-life batteries, what do you do with those? What policies you have surrounding those? And certainly the investor concern in respect to uncertain regulatory policies. And importantly, our research has indicated that there is locally a lack of consumer information. Our survey carried out by our group indicated that only 23% of respondents are aware, extremely aware of EVs, while 34% are moderately aware. So there needs to be action to sensitize. If we look at the comparison of an electric vehicle versus a conventional vehicle, the initial cost seems or is the most negative factor. And we are talking here about life cycle cost. That means the sum of costs over the lifetime of the operating lifetime of the vehicles. We estimate that a typical lifetime would be about 15 years. So on the basis of this assumption, we have, as indicated in the slide here, the right to the bottom, that at this particular point in time, given the present cost regime, it is still less expensive to own and operate a conventional vehicle. And the main difference has to do with the initial costing of that particular EV vehicle. So having recognized those barriers, how do we overcome them? Our research has pointed, and what we had done, to look at all countries that are most countries that were successful and still is in terms of adopting electricity vehicle. One of the impediment or the factor was the regulatory framework in countries, and countries have devised ways to get around this framework, this regulatory framework, in terms of removing the barriers to allow for third-party providers to provide and encourage the development of charging infrastructure. So that needs to be amended. Major factor is the initial cost. We cannot derive the benefit unless we have the vehicles. So to ensure that the vehicles are coming at least on parity with the conventional vehicle, there needs to be consideration of incentive, fiscal incentives to offset the price differential to acquire an EV as against an ICE vehicle. Our research has also pointed us to countries, and many countries, if not all, government policy objectives played a crucial role in increasing, incentivizing the penetration of EV in their transportation mix. And typically, a lot of countries have actually started with the public sector entities that they have under their own control. So how did we approach the regulations? The OUR considers several factors in terms of the regulatory decision making. We looked at the market environment, the market, the economics, the energy security situation in the country. Very important, the impact on the electricity grid. And of course, as regulator, we have to ensure that there's transparency and balance. So in creating, as the next slide will indicate, a regulator framework that has facilitatory provisions for EV, our research has revealed that government needs to play a critical role. The GOJ, we recommend, plays a critical role in facilitating the large-scale penetration of EVs. And these certain actions would include providing enabling regulations and policies, fiscal and non-fiscal incentives, and importantly, establishing environmental mandates and targets for EV penetration levels over time. And similar to how the national energy policies have established targets for the integration of renewable energy into the generation mix. So what were some of the key considerations that the team considered? Well, we have to provide answers to critical questions, which include who can participate in the EV charging market. We have to provide answers that should EV charging be considered as supply? And very important to the investor, the utility, how can the utility recover its investment cost? And what pricing arrangement for third parties if they're allowed to participate in the charging market? So let us look at these individually, so to speak. The current Electricity Act provides exclusivity to the electricity provider at this time for the supply of electricity to third party. In this regard, we have proposed that the government consider the following approaches in order to free up the market, so to speak, in respect to provision of charging infrastructure. We are recommending that negotiation be carried out with the current license holder to amicably facilitate license amendment that would essentially exclude EV from an activity that would be considered a supply of electricity. So that would certainly open in an amicable way the market. The other question, who can participate in EV charging market? The question needs to be answered, should non-utilities be permitted to own and operate charging station? If, as previously mentioned, if the activities at charging station have been exempted and the participation of non-utility company is permitted, then we have set out a set of guidelines, policy consideration for government, the GOJ to consider, develop a policy for entry of non-utilities, develop, and I know the IDB is working with the ministry, develop standards for charging station, interaction, the mode of interaction between non-utilities and utility in this regard, standard for charging station to be implemented by the utility, and very importantly, the integrity of the electricity grid, as this is the main provider of electricity at this time. Crucial question, the utility may, and most likely will, be required to invest in infrastructure to accommodate the additional capacity that will be inserted in the system to provide charging facilities. And so we have to consider whether the tariff recovery, the investment recovery will be only from the EV users or generally from the ratepayers. And those are factors we are considering. We also looked at, and this is where EVs, renewables are not the sole source of energy. For instance, private suppliers set up EV charging stations in the case that they are allowed to supply electricity. That is one factor. The non-utility without the renewable would be certainly the non-EV, the non-renewable utility or charging station would be customers of the utility. So that pricing arrangement has to be considered. Again, because in the early stages, there will not be a significant amount of EV at this time to allow smooth, quick recovery of investments. So the question has to be asked, who will seed the market? In this regard, we recommend that the GOJ, Government of Jamaica, and ourselves consider the following approach, which include negotiate with JPS, determine a rate structure that would assist in offsetting the cost that may result in the early stages, given the low initial uses of charging infrastructure until the market develops. Having said that, in terms of the regulatory requirements to facilitate the take-up of our investment in charging station by third parties, we have recommended short-term strategies that could be implemented in the very short term, and these include governments lead the charge in their procurement initiative. We would mandate that we recommend that the government mandate that EVs be purchased by their ministries, departments, and agencies, and set aside a fixed portion of those procurement of vehicles for EVs. Charging across entity could also recommend that encourage commercial entities to establish charging arrangements amongst themselves. GOJ could also consider providing free EV charging in certain public places. And the GOJ may want to consider incentivizing entities to provide services, charging services, example, tax break, credit, etc. As we had earlier mentioned, one of the biggest hurdles to the take-up of EVs is the initial cost. So we are recommending reduction of import duties and other compulsory payment upon importation. And this is a matter for the Ministry of Finance to consider, to look at the revenue impact or how to neutralize the revenue impact in ways that they will consider. We have introduced reduction of import GCT and SCT for consideration, reduction in motor vehicle annual license fees for EVs. And given the emission status of EVs, the low emission status, look at exemption from environmental protection levy, tax credit to commercial operators who operate these vehicles, and considering grants to assist with EV purchase to these entities. This slide, you will note, is very busy, but I think it's important to show what it showed is that given the level of EV penetration, as EV penetration levels increase, the impact of the grid in terms of the requirement to supply energy will increase. And on the chart, we have shown where for certain levels of penetration, and you will note that we have assumed, and it is in the document which I am encouraging all stakeholders to read the consultation document. 1% penetration of EVs in the system really amounts to about 6,000 vehicles. Under an unmanaged charge situation, meaning it is all vehicles, and it's the worst case, are charged simultaneously. And under managed charge, where we have smart meters, smart charging, time of use incentives, the peak demand would see an increase of 1.4%, as opposed to for free unmanaged charging, 4.6%. The grid for that level can accommodate, based on our studies, that level of penetration. And it is shown here that up to 5%, which is 30%, 30,000 vehicles, the increased energy requirement under a managed situation will be about 2.2%. But we have to note also that the current growth rate of electricity consumption, even before the pandemic, had been about 1.4 to 2%. So again, this would be equate to energy where we are coming from, energy increase where we are coming from. Up to this point, our study indicate that the grid could accommodate that level of increase. But further, there needs to be studies on the impact of the grid on greater penetration of EVs, especially in regional areas, because they might be areas of high concentration of EVs, whereas in some areas there will be very little. So we are recommending that grid studies be undertaken to look at the impact of various take-up of EVs in particular constituency regions. Again, Liz, if you would come in here, this is a consultation process, and we sincerely want to get your opinions. We have provided in the document sample questions that we have put forward for you to answer, or any other question that you may want to provide. And I will ask Lizzie to go through the consultation process with you.
Right, so thank you, Val. So just to talk just briefly about the consultation process, this is a public document. The consultation document, as we had mentioned before, is on our website, and we expect that persons who are interested in the EV market will have a look. We outlined a short while ago just some of the major recommendations, but certainly there is more, and as someone who is considering investing in the market, it would behoove you to have a look and make your input. So we published a document in May. The deadline for receipt of your submission, and we'll tell you in a little while how you can do that, is June 22. But we have been alerting the public about the document. So we have put out public notices in the newspapers. We're having this webinar. We have put out media releases, etc. We will respond to comments received on the document by July 6th, and we'll post your comments as well on our website, as we have to do as a transparent regulator, as well as our comment. And we hope to publish the EV regulatory framework recommendations by August 3. We'll submit that to the respective authorities. In terms of persons who wish to make their comments, we're asking you to, the shortest way we can think of in this COVID era is to send via a facsimile, if you still have fax, or via email. And I will ask Gordon to post the email address in the YouTube and Facebook chats as well. So it's evconsultation@our.org.jm. So I'll ask Gordon to post the email address in the chat, as well as to post the link to the consultation document in the chat features as well. Thank you so much, Val, for your presentation. We're now open to taking your questions.
You're welcome.
If you're just joining us on YouTube or Facebook, thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have you. We're discussing creating a regulatory framework for the electricity vehicle market in Jamaica, what is needed. And of course, our presentation that you heard a while ago would have been based off our consultation document that is on our website, our.org.jm. You go under the electricity sector and it's there on the electricity page. Please peruse it and give us your feedback. But if you have any questions, we're taking them now. If you're just joining us, Val Fagan is the head of a special working group at the OUR, which was looking at the electricity vehicle market and making recommendations. And he's the electricity generation consultant at the OUR. Nicole Morgan is also on our panel today, and she is a legal counsel at the OUR, and she was also a part of that OUR EV working group. And regulatory engineer, Andre Lindsay from the OUR, is also on our panel today, and he was also a part of that working group. We have some questions that we're seeing here. We're going to be taking them, but I'm going to throw a first question to Nicole as the legal counsel on our panel. What gives us the authority to compile such a document, the consultation document? What guides the OUR in that?
Well, good afternoon, Liz and listeners. The OUR is mandated pursuant to the Office of Utilities Regulation Act and the Electricity Act to regulate the electricity sector. And this is something that will have an impact on the electricity sector. Also, the OUR Act imposes on us specific functions regarding the researching on matters that are relevant to our functions, the performance of our functions, and also to advise the responsible minister on anything relating to any of the prescribed utility services. So this initiative is well in line with our functions at the OUR.
With our function, yeah. Andre, time of use. Val had talked about time of use that we had recommended for the EV market in our last JPS tariff determination. Walk us through that. Explain time of use rates and what is being proposed for the electric vehicle market and how persons can benefit from using that option.
Okay. Good afternoon, Liz, and good afternoon, listeners. Time of use. It's coming out of the JPS 2019-2024 rate review process. The OUR, for the very first time, determined time of use rate for the residential customer class. This, we believe, it's very beneficial to this customer category because it gives them the option to consume electrical energy at a time of their choice. Now, time of use tariff structure provides for different rates in the stipulated periods. And the stipulated periods are from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which is the off-peak period, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., which is the partial peak period, and from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. is the on-peak period. Now, this is very suiting for a person with EV because what time of use tariff structure normally does, it incentivizes customers to use energy in the off-peak period. And based on our research, customers tend to charge their EV vehicles overnight, which would fall within that off-peak period. So I say that this introduction of the time of use to the residential customer class is very timely.
Okay, thanks, Andre. We have a number of questions that are coming in via our platforms on social media, and I'm going to throw one to you, Andre. David Cook says we also need to clarify what is an electric vehicle so as not to include petrol hybrids.
Yes, okay. In this context, electric vehicle, what we're referring to is battery electric vehicles, which means vehicles that has no internal combustion engine nor fuel tank. So they use one or more electric motors for propulsion.
Okay. I hope that clarifies it for you, David. I know he should be somewhere in Canada at the moment. Val C. Young says we also need standardized metering stations, payment systems such as for debit and credit cards. How do you respond to that?
Well, yes, I think those are modes of payments that are acceptable. And I think that is currently being applied in the utility payments by card. You're talking about at the charging infrastructure or generally speaking on your metering?
Well, I don't know what you meant, but yes. So you just want that clarification, Val? Okay.
Yes, that's a mode of payment which I don't see having a problem with.
Val, I'm going to throw another question to you. If the OUR has approved the capital costs of 10 charging stations, are those the 10 built by JPS, and does that mean the capital costs are included in the regulatory asset base?
Well, our determination as revenue requirements and 10 charging stations have been proposed, and we have approved those charging stations, and as such they are included as part of the utility revenue requirements.
Yes. Loy Malcolm asked the question, I'm going to put that to you again, Val. Incentives must include the enabling factors to support the emerging sector, that is training and certification, maintenance and vehicle-related services, to include dealers and non-dealers. That's a comment. Somebody saying, I totally agree with you, Loy Malcolm.
Well, that certainly is part of our consideration and recommendation, and the document speaks to the fact that dealers need to ensure that they have the requisite staff training program. We're also recommending that vocational training centers such as HART plays a part in terms of training mechanics, personnel to operate these vehicles. So that is our consideration. We have also indicated that dealers need to, as part of the requirements, propose to stock a wide range of models to give consumers choices, including spares.
Yeah. Gordon, I'm going to ask you, who's our producer, to, again, I see somebody asking about the document. If you could post the document in the YouTube and Facebook chat, Gordon, the link to the document as well as the email address that they can post it to. Why is there no consideration for off-grid charging stations? Val, putting that to you again. Someone wants to know why, and this is Fug in Jamaica, why is there no consideration for off-grid charging stations?
What is meant by no consideration? Obviously,
yes.
Renewable energy plants off-grid are allowed to charge as long as they are not. It's just another supply of electricity. As long as under the current dispensation, they are not selling a supply of electricity to a third party. And I would defer here to Nicole on that response.
Nicole?
Hi, Liz. Well, one of the issues that we looked at was, and Val raised it in his presentation, who can participate in the market. Well, currently, the Jamaica Public Service holds an exclusive license to, among other things, supply electricity. And based on the definition of supply in the Electricity Act, which is really activities involving the sale of electricity to consumers, there is a possibility that if there's an entity outside of the JPS who undertakes to provide commercial electric charging facilities, that could be seen as conflicting with JPS's exclusivity in that regard. So I don't think that we didn't consider what you call it, non-grid off-grid thing, but we really contemplated who can participate.
And this has to be in keeping with the license and what can be allowed.
And hence, Liz, one of our considerations is that we seek amendment to expressly say what is who the supplier of electricity, to ensure that there are no challenges to that definition.
So we're getting a lot of questions on our chat, especially on YouTube. Is there any policy in place, Val? I'm going to throw this to you again. Is there any policy in place to allow EV owners to sell electricity back to the grid?
Yeah, talk about EV to grid, battery to grid. Certainly.
Back to the grid. Is there any policy in place to allow EV owners to sell electricity back to the grid?
Okay, let me try and put some context around that question. You know, currently there is a standard of a contract, I think that is administered by the ministry to incentivize renewable plant owners of sizes residential 10 kilowatts, commercial up to 100 kilowatts. And they are allowed to sell excess energy to the grid. So it is a question of, you know, does that qualify, meaning energy from the battery to the grid? Does that qualify under this consideration? It is something that we certainly have not explored in detail, but we expect that those batteries can supply energy to the grid, but we have to give it some more consideration through the ministry. They are the ones who are now dealing with license, but I think that consideration is a fairly good one.
Another question, will JPS be investing in renewable energy so that the energy is clean from source to the EV?
Is that pointed at me?
That sounds like you again, Val.
The Jamaica, as I said earlier, Jamaica has made significant strides in integrating renewable energy in the generating system. And this is where it makes a lot of sense. Currently, since 2016, the system, meaning the generating system, has been transformed. So we no longer depend on imported oil, fuel oil, to power 90% of our generation. The current mix includes about, I would say, 65 to 70% of natural gas, which is a very cleaner fuel than liquid fuel. But most importantly, the renewable energy has moved from 4% to over 13% of the energy mix. So when you plug in you are theoretically using about 13% of indigenous resource. There are targets, as mentioned earlier. The National Energy Plan policy has set targets to be met for renewable plants introduction. And those plans will be informed by the current integrated resource plans, the integrated resource plan, IRP for short, that is now being carried out, developed by the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology. But yes, it would be a win-win to adopt more renewable energy.
Definitely.
In terms of charging, yes.
I see a question coming regarding charging from home, Andre, and I would like to throw that question to you in another way, but I think it will still be answering the question. Can persons charge from home, one, and will a homeowner need to do any special electric wiring to accommodate charging? Andre.
Okay. Yes, charging from home can be facilitated, and it will not necessarily require anything special. However, it is advised that the EV owner employ the services of a licensed electrician to do the proper checks to ensure that wherever that connection is made, it satisfies the requirements of the government electrical regulator. This is to ensure that, for example, if the connection requires an upgrade for a breaker or the wiring, the size of the wiring. Also, for proper planning and to prevent any power quality issues, transformer overloading, etc. It is also advised to inform the utility provider. So yeah.
Okay. There's a question that has come in. I could probably venture an answer to this, Val. You could probably add to it. Have we engaged the new car dealers about EVs? They are the ones importing new EVs. They need to know the 2030 GOJ target. So I know that would have sent out invitations to them regarding this webinar, for example, would have submitted it to their body as well as to the individual car dealership. We will continue to engage them to let them be aware of what are some of the recommendations and ask them to make their inputs on this document. So that's what we have done, viewer, in answering that question. Val, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that. You're muted.
Just to say that, am I on?
Yes.
Just to say that, the ministry, the government of Jamaica, MSET, they have formed an EV council, and that council comprised of members of the automotive sector, new car dealers, other players in the markets, JGR, gas station supply. So they have a wide, and the utility itself, they have a wide range of members. Our members comprising a wide range of activity. And this is a body that is set up. It's not a decision-making body, it's more of an advisory body. So they are fully well aware of this. And they sit on the council.
I'm taking two last questions as we prepare to wrap up. David Muir is saying, good day. I'm still not clear on V2G charging and adjustment in fees paid, considering that EVs can be an energy storage option for the utility. Val, throwing that one to you.
Yeah, it's right. It's an energy storage option, really. Vehicle to grid means, and where the reverse is done, the vehicle can also supply current to the grid. power to the grid. Yes, that is a possibility. What I'm saying in the last answering the last question was that I think the question was at that time whether EV can supply to the grid. Similar, I said, similar to the standard of a contract, under a contract, because I'm not sure that that is permitted under a contract notes, similar to what obtains with solar or wind plants. So it could well be a matter of consideration, but it is a direct and a good possibility.
Yeah.
So they just need to have standards around that.
Yes. And the last question goes to Rick Case. Will the private and residential charging include telematics to send usage, charging, or V2G data to the grid system operator to grid planning and management? That's a bit heavy. You want me to say that again? Well,
Well, I suspect that he's talking about the whole concept of managed charge, smart charging, where and yes, and that is one of the main factors that will allow us to reduce the burden, if you will, on the electric system, where charging can be made smart, the time of day, and automatically that vehicles can kick in and kick out, and depending on the data coming from and are going to the system, that is a situation that obtained in many places, and it can be done. In fact, that is part of the consideration when we say that with managed charge, we can reduce the impact on the grid. So that is a distinct possibility, feature.
yeah. And I did say, this is the last one, but I recall that Stephen Jackson from the Gleaner had one question that I wanted to put in. Will the framework cover recharging EV aircraft and drones?
Well, I cannot speak specifically about aircraft and drone, but I cannot see the difference as long as the standards are made. Because what you're really doing is charge batteries. So I don't know that we can make too narrow a distinction in terms of what is considered charging. I mean, a battery charge is a battery charge. Obviously, there are different applications, there are different standards, but I don't see anything prohibiting that activity.
Yeah. Val, as we prepare to wrap up, what next as head of the working group, which put together this consultation document? We're expecting to get some detailed responses, and I just put the link to the consultation document in our YouTube chat. Persons can go there and just click on it and view the document. It's an easy read. What next after that, Val? After you get your responses come June 22, what's the next step?
Well, the next step would be to collate these responses, look at them, take them into account, integrate those into our recommendation as we see appropriate. So that would be the next step, to finalize to come up based on the consultation response to the detailed or more detailed, fulsome recommendations. So that would be the next immediate step, to take those into consideration. And having done that, we would now look at promulgating the document, sharing, bring our recommendations for consideration to the relevant government agencies for their own consideration, discussion, and hopefully adoption.
Thank you very much. So Val Fagan is our electricity generation consultant at the OUR and head of a working group at the OUR that compiled the consultation document looking at the regulatory and policy framework for electric vehicles in Jamaica. We also had Andre Lindsay, who is a regulatory engineer at the OUR, who was a part of that working group, as well as Nicole Morgan, a legal counsel at the OUR. So we hope this was beneficial for you. We ask you to continue to peruse the document. Send us your comments, your detailed comments on our recommendations to EV Consultation. That's EV Consultation at our.org.jm. The dialogue continues. Deadline for submission of your views on the consultation document is June 22. Continue to be safe and continue to watch our broadcasts on our YouTube channel to keep informed so that you can make informed decisions.